Mossy, you got that link sent out? Okay. Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson. This week, my guest is Oona Metz. She's the author of the book Unhitched, the Essential Divorce Guide for Women. Oona is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked for more than 30 years helping hundreds of women navigate the emotional side of divorce to emerge stronger, more confident, and ready to thrive. Welcome, Oona.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. You know, when we had our initial conversation, what was really attracting me to this conversation with you is your perspective on transformational changes through the divorce process. You know,
hmm
I've said forever that I think the divorce process, the breakup process, even the turmoil of going through this helps define who we are and helps really grow into something very different.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think both parts are so true. Like, it's so true that divorce is heartbreaking and stressful and chaotic and awful to go through. And it also really, I think, offers for so many people really opportunities for growth and healing and kind of change that they didn't even realize was possible. So I always hold both.
Yeah. I think so often when people go into relationship, go into marriage in particular, there's some idealized thought of what it's going to be. And in
Right.
our youth, we have some fantasies about life, and we haven't explored really who we are to any depth in terms of understanding how to be in relationship, or even what that is, what healthy relationship looks like for many. And this process really kind of puts it in your face.
It sure does. I mean, nobody is standing at the altar thinking when they're getting married, thinking maybe someday I'll get divorced, right? Everybody thinks they're going to beat the odds.
Mhm.
And it's very hard to know how you're going to feel in your relationship or who you're going to be, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line um, in a marriage. And so I really I really hope we can someday get rid of this idea of the marriage failed, because for a lot of people, the marriage worked for a long time until it didn't work
Mhm.
anymore. And they evolved or they restructured or they had a life transition. But it doesn't have to be a failure necessarily.
So you work primarily with women, but this is a piece for both men and
Oh,
women.
yeah.
And you had a statement here that 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Why
Yeah,
did that
that's the
shock me?
statistic. Why
Why
does
did
it shock you?
why did that shock me?
Uh, you tell me. Why did it shock you?
I don't know. As a man, I initiated. I've been divorced twice. I initiated the
Uh huh.
first one. Um,
hmm
my second, she initiated it, and it just seemed like
hmm
okay. I get those dynamics, but I think
hmm
um, I don't know. What's your perspective on that?
in your personal situation, it's a 50-50.
Yeah.
You initiated one and she initiated one. Yeah, yeah. um so I think there's been a lot of research on this, and I can just tell you kind of anecdotally from the hundreds of women that I've worked with, um is that I think in general, and this is not always true, of course, and anything we say today about gender is not always true, but I think in general, what I find is that women are often more active in relationships, in
Mhm.
maintaining them, in starting them, maintaining them, and then I think oftentimes in ending them too. And so, what I've seen in my practice is that a lot of times in straight marriages, uh, the one partner has kind of left in some ways the marriage, right? Through they're just not participating anymore in the marriage. And yet, oftentimes, it's the woman who kind of has to call the end to it.
Ah,
So the marriage kind of might be over, but she's the one who kind of initiates the paperwork and
okay,
um,
that makes sense.
makes the decision to, like, okay, we need to make a change here. Um, so, I mean, I think there's a lot of research also that shows that marriage is, marriage is good for men. And so I think men are less likely to leave a marriage. I've seen in my practice a lot of times, even if men have affairs, and both genders have affairs, but if men have affairs, oftentimes they still stay, they still want to stay married.
Yeah,
Um, you know,
they don't get the disconnect.
right, right.
So, I notice in my practice, in the work that I do, there are many more women that are engaged in the process of trying to move forward, of trying to
Mhm.
understand the situation, of trying to make sense of it and
Yeah.
define structure and health. And that doesn't surprise me as a man because
Hmm.
we're just kind of less inclined to self-exploration and just kind of hunkering down and moving forward. But it
Hmm.
seems that women really engage more in the emotional and practical aspects of parenting, of the divorce
Yes.
as it unfolds. And that troubles me as a man greatly because I want to bring more men into this because they are heavy
Yes.
participants in this and they've got an opportunity to create massive amounts of health with their relationship with their kids and whatnot, and trying to find that disconnect. So I think what I've seen in my practice is that this frustrates women greatly and it makes their
Mhm.
process much more difficult.
Yeah. Yep. I think you're absolutely right. I think, men are still in our society really not socialized to come together and talk about things that are vulnerable or that are hard, especially in a longer term way. Like maybe they could have one conversation, but they don't, like I run these long-term divorce support groups for women. And I have a colleague who was running co-ed support groups,
Mhm.
divorce support groups, and she would have her co-ed group would have be all women,
Mhm.
or it would be all women and one man.
Okay.
And I really think I'm so glad that you're having this podcast, and I think we need to develop other spaces for men to come and be able to talk about what they're actually feeling so that they don't end up kind of repeating. Because I think if you don't talk about what you're feeling, you end up just denying your feelings or criticizing your feelings or repeating the same old mistakes over and over again. And that's not good for anybody.
I run support groups as well, and they are technically
Hmm.
co-ed, but they're typically all women. Every once in a while, I get
Yeah.
maybe two men in it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's a difficult process because most of the people that I work with are in high conflict, divorce
Hmm.
and custody battles, and
Yeah.
that levels up the anxiety for everybody in the process.
Yeah. It sure does.
And for my clients, by and large, this is a problem solving conversation, and I approach it through the lens of the nervous system and the activation
Hmm.
and the
Good.
lack of cognitive process, and try to bring it into problem solving and taking it out of judgment. And
Yep.
without engagement, without somebody like yourself or myself in that
Hmm.
process, that becomes impossible, well, difficult, if not impossible.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm wondering, with what you do, your writings, your therapeutic process, how do you bring the people into understanding that this is just a journey. This isn't an evolution of personal growth in the process, but also the demanding of the notion that um, no matter what the dysregulation that the other person is in,
Mm,
that there's a reason for that dysregulation, whether it's a
mm-hmm,
personality disorder or whether it is
mm-hmm.
just a high emotional piece that they haven't been able to process. How do you draw that conversation in?
In terms of understanding what the other person is going through,
Yeah.
or yeah, I mean, I'm sure you know the work of Bill Eddy.
Oh, yeah. I know Bill
Yeah,
Eddy well.
yeah, yeah. I love his work. And so I think there's a fine line between trying to understand what the other person, what your ex is,
Mhm.
why they're acting the way they are. And sometimes people can go down a rabbit hole trying to understand why it is.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's useful and sometimes it's not useful.
Right.
And what's more useful is thinking about how do you set boundaries with that person? How do you yourself have clear communication? How do you calm your own nervous system so that when you're confronted with somebody in high conflict, that you can communicate effectively, um,
Yeah.
and kind of protect yourself?
Yeah.
So,
I think all of those
yeah,
things come together. If it's done well and it's coached well, that the
yes.
understanding dictates how you set your boundaries, how you hold your boundaries, and it also defines the relationship as it was.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it's not repeated.
Hmm. Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about your book Unhitched, Una.
Oh, great.
Tell
Well,
our audience kind of what this is all about and what got you to it.
yeah. So I've been running these. I have 3 weekly divorce support groups in my practice in Boston, and I've been running them for 15 years. Same day, same time. People come and use the groups for as long as is helpful to them. And in the old days, when I first started running the group, people would ask me for a book. And I gave them, I don't know if you're familiar with Crazy Time. I gave them that book.
Mhm.
That's a book that was written in 1992. And so it became more and more outdated as the years went by. And I kept looking for, well, there's got to be a book out there that's by a therapist about the emotional journey of divorce for women, and I really couldn't find one. Um, and after running these groups for 15 years, I had so much useful information that was kind of jangling around my head. And I finally decided I need to write this down. I need to give this to a wider audience. And so that's how the idea for the book, which is right here, um, that's how this idea for the book was born, from just realizing how much good information I had in my head.
Mhm.
Um, and the way that I structured the book, something you just mentioned a little bit earlier, is that when we know that when stress goes up, cognition goes down, right? And I've had so many women who come to me and they say, I can't read. And I say, it's okay. Your ability to read will come back to you. But when you're in a very, very high stress situation, it can be very difficult to read, especially dense text or legal documents. I mean, that's hard on the best day. Um,
Mhm.
and so I really had to think about how I was going to write this book for people who have a hard time reading in the moment. And so the way that I did it is that I have kind of really chunks of kind of bite sized chunks of really helpful, useful, practical information about the divorce process, starting on the very first day and going all the way through the entire divorce process. And then the other thing I know about people who are going through divorce is that they often feel very isolated and lonely. They come to me and they say, how is it possible that so many people are divorced and I don't know any of them? And so I have in the book a lot of kind of realistic stories. They're not stories from my about my patients because I am bound by HIPAA and I
Hmm.
value my patients' privacy. But I've heard so many stories at this point that I just made composites to put into the book. So the book has plenty of vignettes and stories about people going through divorce so that people reading the book can feel like, oh, that story, I can totally relate to that story. That's something I've been through too, so that they feel less alone. Um, and then the third aspect of the book is that um, I have exercises throughout where you can reflect on your own experience and hopefully really get curious about your own experience and then really learn something, grow from your experience, learn something so that, again, you're not repeating those mistakes and that you're doing the entire grief process so that you get through your divorce and on to, a feeling of more empowerment, happier, transformed by the end.
I think that people don't really understand that this is a grief process that has to
It
be
is.
gone through, and you can't push it. It has its own timeline,
Yes.
um, and that culturally, in many cultures, that timeline kind of has a year to 18-month kind of a gap if people are actually involved and engaged in it. And interestingly
Mhm.
enough, with the group of people that I work with, I've kind of defined that high conflict threshold at about 2 years, because up until
Yep.
that, people are just trying to figure stuff out. They're dysregulated because of the change in their circumstances. Things don't look the same, they don't feel the same, the routines are different, getting the kids
Mhm.
in different forms, and it's chaotic.
Yes. Very, very. Yeah. Yeah.
So
But I like what you said about that you can't
when
rush
you are
it,
walking
you
your
know?
clients or your readers,
Yeah.
yeah, and understanding, I think that the other piece that I've come to understand in the process as well is that when somebody initiates the divorce or the separation, that they've already processed a whole bunch
Mm.
of their stuff.
Right.
They've
Right.
gone through part of the grief process already.
Mhm.
And then the other person kind of gets, even if they kind of got the sense that something's off, they're just getting started. And there's a notion
That's
of,
right.
why can't they just get here, and why can't we just get this done? Because people frankly just haven't processed it yet.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That I think that's so true, and I also think there's a myth out there that if you are the one who's initiated the divorce, you're happy about it, right? And I think people only
Right.
initiate divorce when they've had, like, kind of heartbreak after heartbreak after heartbreak in their marriage, right, leading up to it,
Mhm.
because nobody wants to get divorced. So, even if you're the one who initiated it, you're giving up on your hope that it's gonna get better. You're giving up on your dreams of a future together. There's a lot of things to give up even when you're the one initiating it.
And where kids are involved, there's a giving up of time with those kids that
Yeah.
is a precious
Yeah.
piece for the parents. And that can
Right.
be hard. It's like, how do
Oh,
I do
yeah.
this?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that sometimes keeps people in unhealthy marriages for longer than they should be in because they're worried about their kids or they don't want to mess up their kids. And sometimes it's always a transition for the kids and hard. But I also think, there's sometimes where kids are not doing well in an unhealthy marriage. And when people finally do separate, the kids do better.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in your practice and in your groups, Una, do you talk about pre-separation processing and getting ready to get ready to get ready?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially for people who and especially these days, like, financially, sometimes people can't get into 2 different homes, you know?
Mhm.
Um, And so I really help to coach women. How can you be more separate? How can you almost like practice being separated while you're still living together? Is there another bedroom or another space you can move into? Are there other people in your life that you can rely on to get your needs met? Are there ways that you can spend time separately? Um, and I don't know if you're referring to that or you're referring to what they need to do to kind of get the legal and financial pieces in order, because there's a lot you can do there too.
I think all of it. I think, both of those things are really super important for people to understand what they're getting into
Mhm,
before they get
mhm.
into it.
Yeah.
And the notion that community is so important
Mm.
for that structure of that move away. Uh, and there's a place here that what you think is your community can disintegrate in a heartbeat when this
Yep.
happens, and
Mhm.
that adds to the notion of isolation and
Mhm.
being alone.
Yes.
And how do they begin to pull community back together so they've got some sense of support, not just an attorney that they're talking to
Mm.
that's trying to lead them through the technical
Right.
pieces of divorce. And again, that process we don't even have to talk about, because finding a good attorney that can really hold you in that process is
Mm.
rare.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true though. Community is so important. And I think you're absolutely right that sometimes people end up losing friends or community through divorce, and which can be yet another loss. I think some relationships can be strengthened, but some disappear or are, there's more conflict in them. And I think it's so important for people to be able to find other people who've gone through divorce. And really, you know, eh, sometimes people think, well, I don't know anyone who's going through it. But if you scratch the surface, you will
Find
find
it real quick.
you'll find your tribe. You'll find I had a situation the other day. I just finished actually on Tuesday. I just finished a book tour for my book, and I was flying to North Carolina for an event. And this is just an example of scratching the surface. I'm flying to North Carolina for an event. I step onto the plane. I've got a half a cup of coffee with me. And I greet the stewardess. She greets me. And I said to her, "Do you have a garbage back there?" And she says, "Yeah, I do." And I said, "Okay, just be careful because there's still liquid in here." And she said to me, "Our garbage bags are a lot more reliable than even my ex-husband," or something. She, like, referenced her ex-husband, you know, in this 1 second, we had our 5-second exchange. And so I said to her,
Right,
"I'm in 7C. Come see me in 7C. I have a book for you." And so later on, she
right,
came down the aisle and I said, "Oh, you're divorced?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, I'm divorced." And my seatmate overheard me talking, and then when the stewardess left, she said, "Oh, I'm divorced too." And we started talking, and these are not people who are going to become my friends, but I think I just give it as an example of, you know, if you begin to
right.
look, suddenly you're going to find a lot of people, and community is incredibly important.
I was driving home from the airport with my last travel as well, and I got into an Uber, and we started to chat, and he asked me what I did, and I talked about the high conflict coaching that I do, and he said, "I need to talk to you." So this stuff
Yeah,
is just
yeah, yeah.
over, and
It's
it's
all
amazing how it
everywhere.
comes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So walking people through the process, where do you begin with your clients typically, and how do you help them start to understand and stabilize in their journey?
Yeah. So for my clients who come to the group, I always start with a couple of individual sessions before they join the
Mhm.
group so that I can really get to hear more, a much longer version of their story of what happened in their marriage and what happened in their divorce um,
Mhm.
before they come into the group, and also really make sure that their group is going to be a good match for them. And I think in those sessions, I'm really leaning into empathy about what happened. We're not, in the very beginning stages, I think people really need to tell their story.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, they feel very hurt and betrayed. Um, and so we're not getting into like, well, what do you think your part was in that, in those initial stages? We're really just
Mhm.
helping them to normalize what they're feeling so that they know that this is normal, that this is what you're feeling, and it's not going to last forever. These are not feelings that are permanent, but they're really feelings that will evolve over time. And of course, you're feeling that way. Um, so that's kind of my initial stages with people, is just really leaning into helping them to understand what it is they're feeling. If they're in like the very, very, very beginning stages, and they're not able to take in anything about self care, I say, I want you to just focus on two things. I want you to focus on eating and sleeping, and that's it right now. If you can't take
Those are
anything
so
else
true.
in, and you don't need to think about nutrition. You don't need, this is not a time to think about how much protein you're getting. You just need to get calories into your body, right? And you need to make sure that you're able to sleep. Because if they're in such a dysregulated state, those two things, if they don't do those two things, it's going to make their situation so much worse. And if they are able to get some calories and some sleep, it will make them be able to much better, handle what's coming next.
Yeah, the self care, I think people just don't give enough attention to in the early stages of this because it is a requirement for self-regulation. And when people are dysregulated, they step on landmine after landmine after landmine and create such a bigger mess for themselves.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can really prolong things if they're not able to regulate. So that's a lot of the work we do in the beginning.
How do you approach, or do you approach in your book with this, the um, emotional unfolding of the process of understanding their nervous system and how it actually functions in a manner to either serve them or create more problems for them?
Mhm. Mhm. So oftentimes when they come into the group, they're doing so much connection with each other. And I think that's the thing that really helps them with their nervous system, is feeling like they're in a room full of people who really understand what they're going through. And um, oftentimes people will have um, feelings that they're not able to articulate, but somebody else in the group will be able to articulate them for them. And that feeling for them just really helps their neurology. I'm not talking to them about their neurology or their nervous systems in that language. I'm more talking
Okay.
about connection to them, uh, and just self-care, certainly, and just
Yeah.
doing really helping them to connect to each other, which is such an incredible healing for them.
That's the beauty of support groups and working in a group because the field does express what's not being expressed.
Oh,
Somebody in the group
absolutely.
brings it,
Yes.
and it's really kind of magical.
It is magical.
Yeah.
I just love it. And I think also for people who are coming out of unhealthy marriages, they often feel so terrible about themselves, right? So I think women, when they first come to my group, they feel terrible about themselves, and they imagine that everybody in the room is going to be like somehow, a loser, or, some also like a terrible person. And they walk into the room and they're like, wow, these women are like really strong and, successful and attractive and smart. And I didn't realize that I was coming to that kind of group because they feel so badly about themselves, right? And to watch the transformation from them going to feeling badly about themselves and thinking everybody else in the room is really cool, to then, over months or sometimes years, realizing that they are strong and cool too, or strong and, successful and smart and attractive also. That process in and of itself is, that's what keeps me coming back week after week, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Watching the show, right? It's delightful.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my groups, I ask people not to be friends with each other while they're a member of the group. I really
Hmm.
want everybody to be on the same playing field. And then when they leave the group or somebody else leaves the group, they can continue to be friends. They can reach out and be friends. But I actually ask them not to do that while they're in the group. That's one of the
That's
things that
interesting.
makes my group a
What's
little.
the reason? What's the reasoning for that?
I think that when people, it's interesting because on the one hand, people need community, right? So,
Mhm.
oh, here's a group of people that could be your community. On the other hand, my worry, and I've seen this happen before, my worry is that people come in such a tender spot. And if people are leaving the group afterwards and three people are going out to lunch or get drinks at night or something, and you're not invited, it can feel pretty bad. Or you are invited, but you can't go because you have to get home to your kids or whatever. Um, that just can not feel good. And so I just want them to be all on the same kind of even playing field with each other. So that's the way that I run my groups, but I know that there's other groups and other ways to do it. I also don't want
Well, that
to
makes
set up a situation where somebody's like getting constant text messages from a group member while they're trying to do their own, be at work or be parenting or whatever they're doing, and they're getting all this incoming from the group. So,
yeah,
do you
that's
do
that.
that in your groups, or do you have are people in
Well,
contact with each other?
I do my groups usually, so some of those things aren't germane to the
Uh-huh.
problem, but um, I think for so many people, especially where the conflict is high, there's a codependence nature within many of the people in the group, and boundaries are problematic. So I can see where that could really come in. What I've done is I encourage them, if they want to be in contact with one another, and I found that those groups help each other outside of that.
Mhm.
And that being said, one of the things that I really pound on many of my clients and the people in my group is the notion of healthy boundaries.
Uh-huh.
And there's a place for them to actually be able to practice that in somewhat of a
Practice, yep.
safe um, place. So when somebody starts getting a little too engaged, if you will,
Uh-huh.
that they can throw up the stop sign and say no and have the support of still having the group hold them
Yep. Yep.
without feeling the
Yep.
shame and the disconnect from it. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good. That's really good.
But I can see that, if I was having a support group in physical space and time, that, what you were talking about, coming, going, and going out for a drink and those types of things could be problematic for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that being said, when people leave my group, they
Hmm.
oftentimes make lifelong friends. Like I will still
Yeah.
get text messages from people, who were in the group, from a group of women who were in the group 5, 10 years ago saying, here we are, we all got together again. So that just warms my heart. Like it's really wonderful because they're so open, um,
Hmm.
and so they share so much with each other, and so it really creates a foundation for a wonderful friendship.
So let's talk a little bit, if you would, about this transformational process that the divorce the separation and the divorce can bring in. How do you experience that with a lot of your clients, your support groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think one facet of that is just that basic, like, if you go through something that's really, really hard and you survive it, you
Mhm.
can have a feeling of empowerment. Like, wow, I never thought I could get through that, but I was able to get through that. And maybe that means I can get through other things too. Like, then other things don't seem quite as hard because you've been through this very, very hard thing. But I also think that um, for so many people, especially if they're in a difficult marriage or a difficult divorce, there's so much energy that goes into the marriage and so much focus on the marriage, on the divorce. And when they get through, there's like a whole reserve of energy that they have that they can use for something else. And that's the point at which I really encourage them to be thinking about what they want, what they need in life, who they are. I think there's a massive kind of identity shift that occurs, especially after a long term marriage. And people have an opportunity to kind of think again about what they want, what they need in a way that they often don't do in a marriage, and especially in an unhealthy marriage where they're just trying to kind of tread water. Um, so I really like to encourage people to make what I call the big bucket list and the small bucket list. And the big bucket list is things that, what we think of as regular bucket lists, like, oh, I want to go to, I want to take a trip to Switzerland or something like that. But there's small bucket lists too, things that don't cost money or take time. Like,
Mhm.
you know, I want I always recommend that people change their bedding, by the way. That's one of the first
Absolutely.
things I
First.
recommend. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Change your bedding. Is there anything you wanna do in your house? Do you wanna paint the walls the color that you love, you know? Is there when you go to the grocery store even, like, you're so used to getting the foods that your ex likes or the foods
Right.
that your kids like. Like, what are you like? Did you give up spices in your marriage because your spouse didn't like spices? Like, go spend some time in the spice aisle, you know? Um, so I just encourage them to really do and there's a lot of exercises in the book about figuring out who you are again, what you want, what you need, what you like, what you don't like, you know?
That's so important. The notion of, for the first time for many people in decades, certainly many years, that they are now an autonomous being. They get to make their
Yes.
own choices. I have an exercise in my
Yes.
classes that I have the people in my class go through of, when you entered into the relationship, what did you leave behind that you had
Mhm.
doing? And
Yes.
now that you are free of that shift, do you want
Yep.
to do that again? You can
Yep.
go back and do it. This is your opportunity. Or is there something new, to
Yes.
your point, that you want to
Yep.
explore in your life? Because this is now that opening for you to do you.
That's
It's
right.
so powerful.
Yep, yep. And if they don't, they get stuck, right, in the past. I mean, it's such an important part of the healing
Yeah.
because if they're just still continue to be only focused on what happened in my marriage, what happened in my divorce, oh my God, what's he doing now? What's she doing now? Then it's very hard to move ahead if you
Yeah.
get stuck there.
I've got a quote from George Burns in my book. Um, he says, I look to the future because that's where I'm going to live the rest of my life.
Right,
I
right.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So as we're having this conversation, something popped into my mind, and I really haven't explored it, but I want to pop it into this conversation just for fun. You've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing this for 25 or so.
Mhm.
You've worked
That
with,
doesn't mean that doesn't mean we're old, right?
no, not at all.
Okay, good, 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 good. I was just checking.
um, yeah, I can stay in denial of that. But we've seen different generations enter this process and go through it. We've seen our generation do it. We've seen Gen X do it. We've seen millennials begin to be in this process. And we're even starting the leading edge of Gen Z coming in and starting their processes in this.
Mhm.
Do you see any differences in how they process this piece as they start or get into it?
That's such a good question, and I really would be interested in your view of that as well. Um, I think I would say it feels to me like things have changed in the last 5 years or so. Um, I think there's a lot more information out there on divorce. I think we're talking about divorce more. I think part of that was all of these divorce memoirs that came out. You know, Maggie Smith's fantastic memoir came out. Liz Lenz had one. Leslie Jameson had one. So I think it's not quite so hidden anymore. I
Right.
think we're talking about it. There's still shame and stigma about divorce. Unfortunately, I'm so passionate about trying to reduce the shame and stigma, and I think the way we do that is we continue talking about it, right? And not make it into some secret thing that nobody's talking about. And then this whole rise of divorce coaches,
Mhm.
I think, we've always had a wedding industrial complex, right?
Right.
And now we have a divorce industrial complex too. I mean,
Right.
I think it used to be that you couldn't find any information on divorce, and now there's so much that it's almost can be overwhelming for people. Um, of what am I supposed to do first? There's the coach, the therapist, the attorney, the financial person, all of the online stuff. Um, so that's one big change that I see. I'm curious about what you're seeing.
I think that that's true. I think that there's a lot more information out there, but I also think that there's a lot more misinformation out there. I think that
Oh,
there's a
yes,
lot of
yes,
people
yes. It's
trying
not
to lead
necessarily
where they don't
good
know how to lead.
information.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and the notion, I started my coaching practice 25 years ago, and it's evolved. There's been a lot that has happened over that. I was there when Bill Eddy was just getting his feet anchored in this, and he's a local here in San Diego, and we've sat down,
Oh,
we've had lunch from time to time, and I've had him as
nice.
a guest here. But um, those were the beginnings of
Mm,
what is this high conflict thing about,
yep,
and nobody was talking about it. We were kind of at the tip of the spear at that point,
yep.
and um, we talked about personality disorders, and that became a thing at the time. And then we started to look at that, and it was like, yeah, it is a thing, but there's a stigma in it. We have to destigmatize it. We've got to demonize it and really understand it as a behavior and how to work that behavior. And it seems like it's come full circle in the social media and everything, where everybody's talking about narcissism and
Hmm.
the victimization that goes along with that, and they don't talk about really um, the codependency that's in there, the participation that happens in there, the habiting that happens in there, and the individual's responsibility to make those shifts, the
Yes,
transformation of their own being
right,
into something different to manage that.
right.
So when I see what's going on now in the divorce industrial complex, if you will, um,
Yep.
it's problematic, and finding people that really are anchored and aren't giving people um, the the permission, if you will, to go and um, be a victim in all of this, to
Mm, hmm.
demonize that there is trauma here, there is abuse here. that being said, the antidote to that is transformation. That is the understanding and
That's right.
stepping out of that, and having the agency for that. And I don't see
That's
enough.
right. 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 Because if you get, as we were saying before, if you get stuck in the victimization,
Right.
then that's not a life. That's not a good life to lead.
It's
Right.
not.
If
It's
you're
not a
just
good.
stuck there.
It's not a good mirror for your kids to look into either.
No.
Modeling it that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So
So true.
generationally, I think that that's the difference that I'm seeing with this leading piece of that, and I think it's
Hmm.
with the books like you've got that are out there to really accentuate this notion of this is a time of growth. This is
Yes.
my old podcast host Charlie used to bring forward the notion of this isn't happening to you; it's happening for you.
Uh-huh. Right, right, right. Which is very hard to convince somebody when they're first in it, right? But
Right.
it's so true. And we see the long haul. Right. Right. It looks like we have a couple of, I don't know, there's a couple of things in the chat. I don't know if you want to look at that or not, but we can or
Let me pop the chat down here. What I've got here is just a public chat. This is Mossy just putting out
oh, okay.
stuff
Gotcha.
there. So
I didn't
there's
read it.
nobody.
I just saw.
No, that's
Okay.
fine. Um, what else can you tell us, about your process and about your book? Well, we've got a few minutes left here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more.
I think one of the things that's so important in my book, I have little things about parenting woven throughout, but I also have two full chapters really devoted to parenting. And,
Mhm.
I think that's such an important piece um, because it's something that kids are going through too. Um,
Yes.
and and we know that the thing that kids need most is for their parents to be rational and reasonable and happy. And it's really hard. It can be very hard to be rational and reasonable and happy when you're in the midst of a high conflict divorce. And so, I really take people through just some very practical things that they can do for their kids to help their kids feel supported. Like even just things like how if the kids are going back and forth between two houses, like how you refer to those two houses. You
Hmm.
refer to them as, you come up with a name with your kid for each house. Maybe it's the color of the house or it's the street where your apartment is, rather than it's mom's house or it's dad's house. Because I think that negates in some ways that it's the child's house too, right? So I really like the blue house or the yellow house rather than, oh, you're going to your dad's house today or your mom's house today, because it's the child's house too. So
That's
little
interesting.
things
That's
like that.
interesting. That's a nice concept. I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah, yeah. Or also really encouraging people not to, when they're kids, I have a whole section on how you ease the transition and between houses and not leaning too hard on like I'm going to miss you. I think
Oh
sometimes
man. Oh, yeah.
parents will say to kids and they do it in their best intentions, they're going to miss their kids and they think that their kids want to know that they're going to miss them, and so they'll say, "Oh, Johnny, I'm going to miss you so much while you're at your father's house and I'll see you on Sunday." And that doesn't help the child, you know,
Mm,
because then the
not at
child
all.
is going to be thinking, oh my God, my mother's missing me. And it's going to take your child out of their experience. And when they should be just present with themselves or, free, have some freedom, not to worry about their parent. And so really coaching people about saying, I hope you have a great weekend. And I'm looking forward to seeing you when you get back, so that the child knows you're going to be thinking of
Boy,
them and you're
that
happy
that
to see
language.
them, but you're also happy to have them go. And even if you have to fake it, sometimes you may not feel like that. That may not be a true statement in your heart of hearts, but I still think it's important to be able to fake it, to send your child
The
off.
kids need to know that you're going to be okay. The
Yes.
kids need to know that
Yes.
you're going to be okay. I even take it to another level on occasions, and that is to tell the kids that you're going ice skating, you're going dancing, you're going to go
Mhm.
out with friends, and that you are okay, and that you're in the motion
Yep.
of
Yep.
life, and that kind of sets them free to do
Yes.
the same thing.
Absolutely. And I also think it's good for parents to tell their kids about, for instance, their support group that they're going to. I had one woman
Mhm.
recently who, she had told her kids, "Oh yeah, that's my, every Wednesday I go to my support group." And her child then said, "Do they have support groups for children?" And,
Yeah.
it was such a nice modeling of when we go through hard things, we get support, you know?
Yes.
I do it as an adult, and I'll get you the support you need as a child, but when you become an adult and you have a hard thing, this is important. That's an important thing to teach our kids, you know, not to
Yeah.
keep that hidden
Well,
or somehow think that that's a sign of weakness, or that they would worry because we're going to a support group. In fact, I think it helps them feel better. Like, okay, I know mom's got her support group coming up, so you know,
and as therapists and as coaches, if we're doing our job right, we're getting support, we're getting our supervision, we're
yep,
processing all of this stuff as well. I think everybody
yep,
needs that piece to be able to
hmm,
go through, especially when they're in this I don't want to say horrific place of being in divorce and high conflict, but being in this struggle of trying to manage it, because it
yes.
is activating, to say the very least.
Right. Right, right. And then I think the other thing I also really coach, parents about is when your child comes back from their other parent's house, that you have a very, very light touch about questioning them. You know, you can have a "How was your weekend?" but not "Who was there? What did you do? How long did you do it? Did you take a shower? What did you eat? Did you have enough protein?" That kind of questioning can really put the kid
Right.
on defense and put the child in the middle, of
Mhm.
wanting to stay loyal to both. And so, really trying to, as much as you can, keep it as like, I hope you had a great weekend, and let your child come
Yeah.
to you rather than you
Right.
interrogating your child. Yeah.
Let it be organic. One of the things that I encourage my clients to do as well along those areas is just stop and play catch, stop and shoot hoops, and
Yeah.
not talk, because
Right.
the kid
Yep.
is going to start to express if you just leave the opening for it and they don't feel the pressure.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's awesome.
Yep.
I love
Or
talking to people
go
that are on the
go
same
go
page.
on an errand, go for a drive, because
Yeah.
kids in a car, when you're not making eye contact,
Mhm.
that's really when you can get kids to
Yeah.
talk a lot too, if they're not listening to their device.
So, right, as unplug it. Let's
Yeah,
be present
yeah,
here. Something that is relational, and it's not
yeah,
it,
yeah.
it doesn't have any pressure behind it.
Right, right, right.
So we need to kind of start to bring this to an end here, Una.
Okay.
What else would you like to tell our audience that we haven't talked about that you want them to know, and then kind of wrap that around how they can um, reach out and contact you, buy your
Mhm.
book, get into your support groups, have you as a resource for them?
Great. I mean, one thing I do wanna let people know is that there is an audio version of my book. I, narrated it, and I think that's really it was very important to me that that happened, both because it's just some people's learning style or some people's busy lives. They can only listen to the book while they're driving or vacuuming or whatever they're doing, but also it's a safety issue, for some people, and some people can't have a book about divorce on their nightstand or for their kids to see. And so I
Right.
really wanted to make sure that I could be in your ears if you need me in your ears. I do have a website. It's oonametz.com. That's OONAMETZ.com. And I have a ton of free resources on my website. I have my podcast. This podcast will be up there. And a lot of articles that I've written. I have a Psychology Today blog as well. And that can all be found on my website. And you don't have to put in your email or anything to get the resources. It's just up there for free.
Nice.
My support
Fantastic.
groups are in the Boston area. They are all in person, so I don't see people online. But I welcome anybody who wants to come to one. And I also have developed a training program to teach other therapists around the country how to lead the groups that I lead. So if you're interested, if you're a therapist listening and you're interested, any kind of mental health clinician, if you're interested in learning more about running these groups, which are incredibly satisfying as a therapist to run,
Right.
please get in contact, because I now have people trained in New York and Texas and Massachusetts, and that just came out of having such a long waiting list that I felt like I needed to have more people trained in Boston, and now it's spread. So
Yeah, we want to be able to reproduce this because so many people
yeah,
need this kind of information, and there's a legacy piece to
absolutely.
it, right?
Yeah,
A place where
yeah,
we're going to step away and we want it to continue.
right, right.
All right. So thank you so much for coming in and doing this podcast with me, Ona. And I want to just kind of step back for a moment, see if there's anybody that's got questions here that they have of you or of us. And
Okay,
we'll sit here for just 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And if nobody shows up, we'll just close it out. Okay.
great. Okay.
Right. There's
Don't be
nobody
shy if
yet.
you're listening. You can ask any
Exactly.
question you want.
I know we've got listeners here. We can see them in here. So
Mhm.
step in.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I do have really good guests in here, and
Uh-huh.
their
Great.
opinions and their conversations are valued. So come on, guys.
Absolutely. Well, they may be listening while they drive and not able to chat, but
Yeah.
I hope if they feel so inclined, they'll be able to.
Some days we get it, some days we don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
Yep.
All right. It looks like we're gonna kind of be lonely here for the rest of this. So I want to thank you so much for coming in and doing this. I want to thank our listeners for coming in and listening. This will be up. I'm thinking, and you're coordinating it with Mossy, so she'll let you know when we're going to post and coordinate all of that
Great.
with you. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure being here and having our conversation today.
Thank you.